But all stakeholders have an important role to play. Industries and businesses in finding solutions for goods and services that align with the SDGs, and communities and individuals in supporting SDG initiatives and in holding governments and the private sector to account. Education, research, and innovation are all essential to achieve the SDGs, so universities, with their ability to create and disseminate knowledge and solutions, play an absolutely vital role. You can probably already tell that reaching the SDGs will be no small feat. All responses, from the global to the national to the local, even down to the individual, need to be coherent and aligned. But progress to date has been slow, so that it becomes very clear now that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed from governments, businesses, and communities. Many experts say that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need societal transformations now that are unprecedented in human history and which represent a profound departure from business as usual. You may feel like the challenges are too big and too many. After all, you're just one person. But think about it this way. Every time you spend money, you have an opportunity to spend your money better. Every time you talk to someone, you have an opportunity to challenge their ideas for the better. You can seize these opportunities every day, 365 days a year. And of course, every couple of years, you have the opportunity to vote for the better. Not just in national elections, but in local ones too. That is an immense potential that lies with you and every other individual. The SDGs give us a roadmap for making the right choices and arriving at the right answers. Don't forget, together, we are 7.8 billion people. Together, we can make big changes happen. It happens to everyone. Waiting in line for your morning coffee, you scroll social media and news on your phone. What you find depresses you. Thousands of migrants are fleeing a civil war, risking their lives only to be turned back at borders. Speculations have sent the housing markets into a frenzy, and employment numbers are tumbling down. Journalists have uncovered a decades-long cover-up of child abuse by coaches and doctors within competitive gymnastics in your country. Closing the news app, you open your family group chat. Maybe one of your siblings has posted something funny, and at this rate, you could use some cheering up. The group chat has blown up overnight, and what you see makes your heart sink. Bushfires are raging again, and there's one burning only 2 suburbs over from where your cousins live. Everyone is frantic with worry. At this point, you walk away, coffee in hand, tense, miserable, and confused. You think, this can't go on. Something needs to be done. Someone needs to step up. We need a plan to fix all this social injustice, economic chaos, and environmental destruction. This is where the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, come in. Fixing the kinds of problems that bring your entire day down in the morning coffee line can't happen in just one way. The SDGs cover sustainability from different angles: socially, economically, and environmentally. They set global goals for the 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. The SDGs form the heart of the 2030 Agenda, an action plan adopted by all 193 countries of the United Nations. They call for decent jobs, quality education, good health, gender and income equality, clean energy and water, biodiversity, and climate action. They aim to reach sustainable development by 2030, achieving these goals, but they're not the only players. Businesses, civil society, indigenous leaders, academia, and the general public all contribute as well. You might wonder where they came from. The SDGs were born in 2012 at the Rio+20, a UN conference on sustainable development in Rio de Janeiro, which was the largest conference ever held by the UN. Until 2012, there were different international agreements that dealt with environmental challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss. And there were the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, that aimed to achieve certain social targets in developing countries by the year 2015. The countries meeting at Rio+20 decided that a more comprehensive set of universal goals was needed to tackle the urgent social, economic, and environmental challenges facing the world. This kicked off the broadest consultation ever run by the UN. An unprecedented effort was made to get input from as many people as possible, particularly those who don't often get a say in international agreements. Over 10 million people around the world participated in the consultations and helped shape the SDGs. Apart from national governments, major stakeholder groups that were consulted included women, children and youth, indigenous peoples, NGOs, local authorities, workers and trade unions, business and industry, scientific and technological community, and farmers. I am pleased to share some good news for people and planet, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said to a packed room of press delegates. The good news? After 3 years of negotiations and debate, 193 countries had agreed to a set of development goals more bold and ambitious than anything that has come before them, the SDGs. The due date for the SDGs is the year 2030, which makes the 2020s the decade to deliver. But how can we know if progress on any of these monumental issues has been made? The 17 SDGs are built on an evidence-based framework of 169 quantitative targets and 232 indicators that accompany them. This ensures that the SDGs are clear, concise, time-bound, and measurable, which helps governments and decision-makers to include the SDGs in their planning. This means that we can keep track on each of the SDGs' progress. To achieve the SDGs, all countries are expected to set up policies and investment plans, and to use the targets and indicators to track their progress. They then report their progress to the UN. This is done through voluntary national reviews, VNRs, with a selection of countries reporting each year. Most countries, including Australia, have already submitted their first VNR. Governments are crucial in achieving the SDGs because they create and finance policies that support the goals. But all stakeholders have an important role to play. Industries and businesses in finding solutions for goods and services that align with the SDGs, and communities and individuals in support in the private sector to account. Education, research, and innovation are all essential to achieve the SDGs. So universities, with their ability to create and disseminate knowledge and solutions, play an absolutely vital role. You can probably already tell that reaching the SDGs will be no small feat. All responses, from the global to the national to the local, even down to the individual, need to be coherent and aligned. But progress to date has been slow, so that it becomes very clear now that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed from governments, businesses, and communities. Many experts say that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need societal transformations now that are unprecedented in human history, and which represent a profound departure from business as usual. You may feel like the challenges are too big and too many. After all, you're just one person. But think about it this way. Every time you spend money, you have an opportunity to spend your money better. Every time you talk to someone, you have an opportunity to challenge their ideas for the better. You can seize these opportunities every day, 365 days a year. And of course, every couple of years, you have the opportunity to vote for the better. Not just in national elections, but in local ones too. That is an immense potential that lies with you and every other individual. The SDGs give us a roadmap for making the right choices and arriving at the right answers. Don't forget, together, we are 7.8 billion people. Together, we can make big changes happen.
We are facing an existential crisis.
Unlike anything the world has ever seen.
We need to take action.
Everyone has to stand up.
The warning is not a new one.
Our world faces a triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature loss and pollution.
For generations, humanity, often without realizing it, has been destroying the natural world. In the name of progress, we have polluted the Earth's oceans, chopped down its forests and clouded its skies. Today, nature and our own survival rest on a knife's edge.
It's time to ratchet up the action that we need to have at the country level.
The United Nations Environment Programme was established with one goal in mind: to unite the world in saving our planet.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world will profoundly alter the future destiny of our planet.
For 5 decades, UNEP has used science and its mandate to bring the world together to help nations find solutions to grave environmental threats.
What is this pollution that we have heard so much about?
The Mediterranean is sick. It's being poisoned slowly but steadily for those who need it most.
The 1970s found a world grappling with an unprecedented crisis of pollution. Could the seemingly irreparable damage be undone? UNEP inspired the world to take action, preventing oil spills and toxic discharge by ships, uniting 143 coastal states to limit ocean pollution and save marine life, reducing air pollution and ending the scourge of acid rain. But soon, the world would face its biggest environmental challenge yet.
The destruction of the ozone layer on a global scale is no longer just a theory. The hole over the Antarctica is no longer an isolated seasonal phenomenon.
If the breach continued to grow, the planet would suffer lethal levels of ultraviolet radiation, harming human health, biodiversity, and climate. In 1987, UNEP facilitated the Montreal Protocol. Over 30 countries agreed to phase out the production of almost 100 ozone-depleting substances. The protocol remains one of the greatest achievements of multilateralism.
All nations gathered here to be proud of what we had achieved.
This success set the tone for a series of powerful accords, limiting the movement of toxic waste across borders, protecting the Earth from dangerous, long-lasting chemicals, and restricting the international trade in mercury. Most recently, in 2021, UNEP finished a 2-decade-long campaign to rid the world of highly toxic leaded petrol, saving an estimated 1 million lives each year. As the world grappled with pollution and waste, another crisis was brewing.
I have dreamt of seeing the great herds of wild animals, jungles and rainforests, full of birds and butterflies. But now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see.
Poaching and habitat loss were pushing some of the world's most iconic animals to the brink of extinction. Driven by science, UNEP supported a series of international treaties, limiting and in some cases banning the trade of endangered species, safeguarding migratory animals, expanding protected areas, and increasing financing for biodiversity protection. The seminal Earth Summit in Brazil introduced the idea of sustainable development.
This is an historical moment for the mobilization of all peoples of the world.
Over the last 5 decades, UNEP has helped more than 100 countries enshrine the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions and produced scientific studies to guide member states in their decision-making. In 2012, a new international body was established to provide scientific data on biodiversity in a joint effort from UNEP and other UN organizations. In 2019, it found that 1 million species face the threat of extinction, underscoring the urgency to act.
Every action we take alters the earth that future generations will inherit.
The world is starting to recognize the effects of planetary warming, but UNEP began sounding the alarm 3 decades ago. As early as 1988, UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization launched the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. For over 30 years, IPCC science has helped member states counter climate change, earning the body a Nobel Prize for its work. UNEP-backed studies have informed
Hey, good evening. You're all welcome to this wonderful edition of the Teach4SDGs program. And on behalf of the leadership of AIIDEV Africa, I really want to congratulate each and every educators that are on this call. And I would like to confirm if you can all hear me this evening. I know some of us are joining with a different time zone at 4:38 p.m. where I am. I know some might be 6:38 thereabouts. Okay, I can see the confirmation. Once again, we want to welcome each and every one of us to this first series, and that's the first workshop series and also the onboarding session for the Teach4SDGs program. My name is Emmanuel Olaoluyo, and I'm going to be representing the leadership and also be managing this event for this period of the workshop series. with my other colleagues. I also have Anita Doris and Esther Babatunde on the call. Thank you for joining, and each and every one of us, thank you for joining as well. But before we move to today's session, it's very, very important we get to do this. I can see a lot of names that are not properly in place. Please ensure your display name starts with your country name. So if you are from Nigeria, let your display name start from Nigeria, then your first name, then your last name. If you are from Cameroon, let your display name start from Cameroon, then you move straight to your first name and your last name. Please, I want us to do that immediately. And I can see some digits, 8530381360. It's not allowed. Please, we might actually have to put you out of the room if you don't rename your display profile very well correctly. And those of us that are raising our hand, I don't know why we are raising our hand. Maybe you have a question. You can definitely use the comment section. However, we are still going to share more information we get to discuss. Please, those of us that our display names are not properly well renamed, let's do that now. You can just do by clicking, you see more, and you see rename. When you click on your name, you see more, then you see rename. It's something that you can do in just less than 10 seconds. Someone said he's not hearing me. I am loud and audible. I'm very sure. Hopefully it might be a network issue from your end. Okay, I can see some people that they are doing that. They are properly renaming their profile. Okay, I can see people from Kenya, Moses, and yeah, that's very good. Let's get to do that before we start the session. It's very, very, very important we do that. So all the Nigerians that have done that, kudos to you all. Yes, it's very, very important you do that. And I can see some South Africans too, and South Sudan too that have done that. Thank you for doing that. It's very, very important we all do that before we kick off the platform. Yeah. This evening, it's so good to have each and everyone on the call, and I will be moderating today's session. And on behalf of the leadership of AIIDEV Africa, we all want to welcome you to this transformative session, and which is the Teach4SDGs, the Cohort 2 of the Teach4SDGs program, which is an initiative of AIIDEV Africa, Advanced Initiative for International Development, that aims to contribute to the achievement of, the program aims to contribute to the achievement of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by improving the quality of education and also building the next generation, the next set of global citizens, and also inspiring their action towards more sustainable development and towards more sustainable future. And as we all know, that sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the current generation, the present generation, without compromising the needs of the future generations from meeting their own needs. This project seeks basically to enhance each and every educator's knowledge and capacity, both from primary and let me just use the word K-12, and enabling you to be able to educate, to know more about the SDGs, to know more about various aspects of the SDGs that has to do with circular economy, green economy. These are things you are going to be learning in this session. You also learn about climate change, biodiversity conservation, environmental sustainability, and various aspects. And we can assure you that this series is going to be a life-transforming one indeed for you. You are indeed going to enjoy it. You are going to enjoy it back to back. And please, if you are putting on your video, kindly ensure you are properly dressed before you put on your video. It's very, very important. We appreciate you are properly dressed before you put on your video. And like I earlier mentioned, this program is an initiative of AIIDEV Africa. And the mission of AIIDEV Africa is to innovate solutions to accelerate sustainable development in African countries. We advocate, we advance, and get to promote sustainable development through our digital innovations and solutions. And part of our solutions are things which you are going to also know later. And we also get to accelerate sustainable development, where we develop the best programs and projects and implementation strategy for achieving SDGs across different countries in Africa and across other continents, because we believe that the world is going to be a better place if we succeed in these are our goals and objectives, and without leaving anyone behind. We all have a role to play in that. And before we move to the first session for today, as we are going to be receiving a special guest of honor, and it's a great blessing to always have him on the call anytime and every day. We are looking forward to have this kind of events. Before he comes up on board, I'm also going to be sharing some information which we are definitely going to need, which we are definitely going to dwell on. And for this project, we have the bit of promoting sustainable development and educating the future generation about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this initiative seeks to empower primary and secondary school teachers across African countries. So we still want to do more. We want to equip more, we want to build more capacity, whereby you can get to advance on your teaching deliverables across your various schools. And I'm going to share more information about what the program looks like. And this is a very key area which you are very concerned about. I also want to recognize all our YouTube participants. Thank you for joining. I can see you. I can see each and every one of you that are joining from YouTube. It's so good to have you. It's so good to have you on the call. And to all those who have renamed that display name properly, kudos to you. Those who have not done that, let's get that done now. Please, let's get that done now. It's very, very important. Okay, I was referring to the structure of the program. This program is in two phases, basically. The very first phase is the workshop series, where it has to do with capacity building, trainings, and various modules which you are going to learn on. And the second phase has to do with the SDG activation phase. And let me just see if I can share my screen briefly. And please, Esther, Anita, once Professor Paul is on the call, please kindly notify me. Let me know once he's on the call. His display name should be Professor, it should be Paul Walsh. And let me know when he's on the call. All right, thank you. So as I was saying earlier, let me just try and share my screen so that we can have a good knowledge of what this program is all about. And I once again want to welcome each and every one of us that are joining this evening. Okay, like I earlier mentioned, this program is in two basic phases. We have two basic stages. And the very first stage is a workshop series and for educators. And the second phase has to do with the SDG activation and evaluation. And as you can see it on my screen, we have the onboarding. Okay, we've done onboarding earlier, and we have the commencement of workshop series, which is starting today. I'm going to talk more about this workshop series because we are going to be having 8 different modules, and that's the next the next 4 weeks. We are going to be having 8 modules every Fridays and Saturday evening, 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. That's when we are going to be having this series. We actually don't want to rush you too much. We could have 2 modules per day, but it's best we have it in this slow and steady mode, whereby it can also be easy for you to comprehend with. And the very first one has to do with evolution and concept of sustainability. Someone is writing on my screen. I would kindly appreciate that person stop. Okay, the very first one has to do with the evolution and concept of sustainable development, while the second one has to do with embedding education for sustainable development, that is ESD, as normally called, into and SDGs into the education system. And the third module, which we are also going to be focusing on, is climate change, forest and biodiversity conservation. The fourth module is on grant application and proposal writing. As we found this very important, it's not just only those who are in the social development sector that are meant to apply for grants. Teachers can apply for grants. Currently, there is an ongoing application for educators to COP28 in November, December, and this will also share with you, which we really want you to benefit from. So you are going to have advanced knowledge on how you can get to apply for grants and win grants. And another aspect is the circular economy and sustainable waste management. This, you are going to be learning more about the 10 R's of circular economy, and you're also going to be learning more about the sustainable waste management practices. And another key area which you're also going to be learning, that's on 26th of August, that is the next week of our learning series, that's on green economy and environmental sustainability. I know part of this looks new, and the other part which we'll also be having is the innovation and technology for quality education, how we can effectively use technology, how we can effectively use AI in our day-to-day activities. And lastly, we are going to be rounding up with project management for educational development, and which will lead us to the training on SDGs activation. And after this, we are also going to have a post workshop assessment, and this just to evaluate our knowledge, to know how far we really understood what we've been taught during the workshop series. And also that leads us to the phase 2 of this project, which is the SDG activation and evaluation. After this workshop series, it's expected of us as educators to go back to our schools to educate these youngsters, to educate, to set up the SDGs within your schools, most especially for schools that do not have existing clubs related to SDGs. Might not really be specifically SDG clubs. It might be a green club. You can call it anything. You can name it anything. And from there, you are making great impact. And after which you are part of those who you've trained, there is a task that's in the month of September. It's the learner videos competition. And those are your students, whereby they are to submit a video on a particular task, and there is an award for the winning set of students. That is going to be communicated later. And later in the month of October, we are going to be submitting our report, our SDG activation report. And after, we are going to have the screening of learners, videos submitted, and other submitted resources between the 8th to 14th of October. I really want to give more information about these aspects. Please, it's very important we keep to these timelines, because at AIIDEV, we have a conceptualized timeline of events, and which we can't just change, because definitely as we are planning Cohort 2, Cohort 3 are upcoming too. So if there is going to be a change in Cohort 2 timeline, definitely it's affecting Cohort 3 timeline. So it's very important for us as educators. Let's keep these timelines, let's note them. And after which the reports are going to be evaluated, the impacts are going to be evaluated between 8th and 17th of October. And those who are going to end up successful, as I'm using that word, I mean the successful educators, successful in the sense that you could complete your SDG activation projects and you were able to submit your report. We see some people, there are some people on this call this evening that were part of Cohort 1, and they activated their SDGs project in their respective schools, but they couldn't submit their report due to one reason or the other. That's why they are coming back on this program to complete the SDG activation. We won't like such to be your case. We would like a situation whereby you activated your SDG projects in your school, and at the end of it all, you submitted your reports, and each and everyone are certified at the end of the program. And I will quickly say this, also the virtual graduation dates, though this is tentative, it's likely to change. And from this program, we believe that it's going to be an impactful one, whereby you're going to learn about various aspects. Definitely you're going to have a lot of knowledge, you're going to have built a lot of experience in the SDG and also sustainability space. And as educators, these are things which we need to add to our profile. These are things we need to add to our teaching. These are things we need to also add to the curriculum. We know that, yeah, government controls the curriculum, but you as educators, you also have control over it to some extent, whereby you can keep these learnings during your teachings, during your engagement with the students. So basically, this is a timeline of events for this cohort, both the phase 1 and phase 2 of the events. And I think this is a major thing which to share. And yeah, though there are some rules of engagement, and we believe that each and every one of us are matured, and we are elderly people who are also having younger ones that are looking up to you. So it's expected that we all adhere to instructions. And for every workshop, there is always a tracking and evaluation form. So don't just think that you are not going to attend this workshop and at the end of it all, you are going to execute SDG activity, you are going to submit a report. If you don't have a good attendance in the workshop series, it's also going to affect your certification at the end of the program. So please, it's very important you attend all the workshop series, and these are things you can also record. The workshop series is always streamed on YouTube, and it's there forever. It's there forever. So please, let's endeavor to keep to these good standards, and we believe that you're also going to be a good role model to each and everyone. And for the community, which we have two communities. We have the WhatsApp community. We also have the LinkedIn community. It's very important for us to abide to the rules, most especially on the WhatsApp community. And the rules basically is from 6 a.m. Mostly on Monday to Friday morning. The WhatsApp community is going to be closed, and strictly so that we are not going to be disturbed and with various volumes of information. So the only time the WhatsApp community is always open is just during the weekends. But the LinkedIn community is forever open. You can get to engage on the LinkedIn community. This is going to be shared with us, and we are going to get to know more about it. And if you don't have a LinkedIn account, these are part of things which we expect you to have. You have free access to this, and these are things that add to your profile. You have to start showcasing your work. After you've learned about SDGs, you've taught your students about SDGs, you also have to put what you've done outside. You have to give yourself visibility. It adds value, it adds significance to you. And I'm going to stop here. I don't know if I should take questions now. And okay, let me just see if I can take 2 questions now, because I can see our guest on the call. I can see our special guest on the call. Thank you for joining so early, sir. We are so glad to have you. We are so glad to have you this evening.
No problem. Joy to be here.
Thank you, Prof. And before Prof comes up to have the session, we are going to take 1 or 2 questions. But please, if you don't rename if your display name is not properly praised, you are not going to be recognized. Your display name should start with the country you are joining from, then your first name and your last name. So all of us that are raising our hand, please, we are not going to call any one of you. So go and ensure that your display name is properly in the right order. So let me see if there is anybody that, okay, I can see a representative from Nigeria. All right, Idris, can you unmute your mic and ask your question? Just in 30 seconds, please. We have to start the session right away. In 30 seconds, you can speak on Mr. Idris.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Idris, it seems the network is very bad at your end. We can't hear you clearly. And at this point, we might not have to, we appreciate if you can use the comment section. Okay, let's have Emmanuel, sorry. Emmanuel from Ghana, you can you unmute your mic and ask your question? Emmanuel? Mr. Emmanuel from Ghana, can you unmute your mic and ask your question?
Hello, okay, I want to ask, can you share the linking community link with us so that we can also run?
Okay, all right, that's awesome. And that's going to be shared with you in the next email communication, which you're going to be receiving. All right, can we have Alaji Mohammed from Nigeria? You can unmute your mic and ask your question.
So we are trying to join the link, but we don't know how to join it. We try to join it, but it cannot do. We don't know either the problem is from our phone or is from the link. It's always showing error. So we
which
don't know
of the
either.
link? You mean this same Zoom link, or which link are you referring to?
One that you will tag your name and share it via WhatsApp.
Okay. Now I understand. You are referring to your personalized flyer. That's a bespoke flyer. So
Yes,
they are also going to share that again and help you out. However, you just have to retry because a lot of people have. Yeah, a lot of people have done.
Okay, sir.
Network error. You can also change your device and try with another device. All right, let's take the last question from that's Frontier from Cameroon. Can you unmute your mic and ask your question? Hello, Frontier.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Coordinator. I just have one question. How are the SDGs monitored and evaluated, the SDGs?
Okay, all right. So we are going to, it's leading, that your question is going to lead us to the session for today. And yeah, there are a lot of things which you're going to learn from the session for today. And I believe it's exactly 5 o'clock now, which I would like to bring up our guests. This is going to be responded to, which you've asked, and also going to share more information on that. However, we are going to have more questions. We are going to have an opportunity to ask more questions at the end of today. And today we are blessed to have Professor Patrick Powash, who is the Vice President of Education and also the Director of SDG Academy at the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He is on his secondment from University College Dublin, where he's a full professor of International Development Studies and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development Studies in UCD Dublin. He received a PhD in economics from London School of Economics and Political Science. He has held academic position in Trinity College Dublin, Harvard University, Columbia University, and he has held various positions in United Nations, European Commission, IMF, and World Bank. He's currently focused on sustainable development education that is informed by science and practice policy. Please, with a clapping ovation, please let's welcome our special guest for today in person of Professor Patrick Powash. I can't see you are not dropping that. If it's an emoji you want to use, if you want to clap, do something just to welcome our speaker for today. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, over and over. Thank you, Prof. It's so good to have you this evening. Over to you, sir.
No, it's a joy to be here. Can you remind me, Emmanuel, how much time you want me to talk? And I obviously would love to take questions. So I'm Irish, so I can talk forever. So you have to give me a limit. You have to say.
Okay, 45 minutes for your.
Okay. I won't. Yeah, I'll maybe 40 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions. Am I able to share some slides as well?
Yes, Prof, you can.
Yeah. Very good. So I'm going to try that. And we see how we go. So can everyone see the slides?
Yes, and it's on a full screen. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Okay, so thank you very much. It's an honor to be invited to this onboarding ceremony. I can't tell you how important primary and secondary school teachers are. Like, I know just from my own past that it's just so important to have, you know, kind and good primary and secondary school teachers. They set you up for life, and it's very important. And of course, now we realize that the globe, or let's call it the global village, is having a problem with climate change and with sustainable development. And of course, it's the teachers who are willing to go back to school, if you like, and to learn about sustainable development, and then do all they can to bring it back into the classroom and to give it to the children, you know, in primary and secondary school, or some people might call it K-12. In Ireland, we call it primary and secondary school. So thank you very much for the invitation. And before I forget, obviously, Emmanuel, the SDG Academy is very happy to work with you and share resources. I realize that we have created nice online courses, and I'll show you where they come from, but, you know, they are in English, and, you know, we are going to work hard to put them on repository so that people like your program can take them and repurpose them and translate them into their own languages and into their own context, because the science is correct, but it's different, like, depending on where you are and where you live, how you apply the knowledge and how you put yourself on a pathway to sustainable development is different. But I do believe that this should be done in partnership, though. I don't think people should be on their own doing this, and we're very happy to support you in any way we can, and we will talk about that, or we'll keep communicating as the program goes on. Okay, so thank you very much for the kind introduction. So my name is Patrick Paul Walsh. It's a long story why I'm actually called Paul. I'm called by my second name, but I guess in Ireland, when my parents were young, there was pressure to call you after their grandparents. So my grandfather was called Patrick, and then the second name would be after the Pope. So I was Pope Paul VI when I was born, and that's why that's my name. But my mother did not like me called Patrick, because she didn't want me to be called Paddy, Patsy, etc. So she always called me Paul. So everyone who knows me calls me Paul, but I use my formal name at work. It's on my birth cert, it's on my passport. But it turns out Patrick Paul Walsh it's very common names, but not that common together. So you can find me on the internet very easily and on LinkedIn if you just type in Patrick Paul Walsh. And I'm happy to talk to you. So just a little bit about SDSN, which is the SDG Academy is part of. So going back to, there was a document called Rio +20. And I think one thing about the SDGs that is nice is that it actually did not come from the Northern Hemisphere. It did not come from the rich countries. In fact, the momentum for putting the environment into socioeconomic planning came from South America. It actually came from Brazil and Colombia and countries like that. And in some ways, I think the US and Europe and other countries were reluctant to do this, because obviously our performance on the environment is not good compared to, say, economic or social aspects. But it happened. And the document that actually started, you could start this discussion back to the Earth Summit in '72. You can go back further, but The Rio Plus 20 in 2012 talked about the 4 dimensions of sustainable development: sustainability in society, sustainability in your livelihood, sustainability in the environment, and sustainability in governance. So it's got 4 dimensions. And in 2012, at the time, the president of the Sustainable Development Solution Network at the moment is called Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He is a university professor in Columbia University in New York, and he has been a special advisor to 3 secretary generals, starting with Kofi Annan, who was brilliant, and then you had Ban Ki-moon, and now Antonio Guterres, who's from Portugal. But Ban Ki-moon at the time, that when he was advisor to Ban Ki-moon, they decided to have a 3-year process where they would, 2012 to 2015, they would discuss what would replace the Millennium Development Goals. And we know it's the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the time, they decided that it must be a bottom-up process. There must be consultation of all the stakeholders, the UN system, intergovernmental system, but also anyone, you know, all of civil society, corporates, and governments themselves, and so on and so forth. So SDSN was born where we had a mandate to what's called to have legal and academic oversight of all the work plans that were happening both governmentally and non-governmentally over those 3-year periods. Amina Mohammed was a co-chair of SDSN at the time, and now she's the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, obviously from Nigeria. And SDSN, after the 2015 agreement was signed, the Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, SDSN is more like a think tank that where academics and lawyers, we mobilize partnerships of all levels of governance to try and implement the SDGs. In other words, we work with local communities, we work with local government, with national government, regional governments like the European Union, and global institutions like the UN, and so on. But the idea is to implement the SDGs. And there was a good question about the follow-up review, or that I'll come to at the end. I won't forget to address that question about how it's monitored, or how the SDGs are monitored in its implementation. Okay, so there is a little article. I'll share the slide with you. There is a little article about 10 years of SDSN by the chair of the board, John Thwaites from Monash University, and by Jeffrey Sachs, and they explain what SDSN has done for the last 10 years. One of the reports that's very useful is every year SDSN brings out the Sustainable Development Report, and this is what's called the SDG dashboard, or where we rank the SDG index, where we rank countries on 166 indicators. So this is part of monitoring. And what's interesting here is that the UN itself used to do it in UN DESA, called the Human Development Report. And that is still produced, but it's a ranking of countries on the basis of economic and social indicators. This report is a ranking of countries on the basis of economic, social, environmental, and governance indicators. It's not done by the World Bank, the monitoring unit. It's not done by UN DESA and the UN. Why? Because a lot of rich countries don't want to be ranked, particularly when it comes to their performance on the environment. Why I'm showing you this report, though, is that the first section is written by the Leadership Council of SDSN, and it does a nice review of what's happened on the first 7 years of the SDSN, and it also gives a vision for what SDSN is going to do in the future. So if you wanted the quickest way to understand SDSN, I think just read it's an online report that's free, open access, and you can just read the first section, and it gives a nice overview of what's happening with the SDGs at the midpoint, but also a kind of a future, if you want to call it, plan for what SDSN is going to do to the Summit of the Future next year, up to 2030 and beyond. I'm a career academic, meaning that I've, did my BA and master's and PhD, and I've been always a part of an always a part of a university, and I still am, even though I'm on secondment to SDSN for the next few years. But I was with SDSN from the beginning. I was initially on the board, and now I've switched to operations, and I'm glad to do this. So I'm 20% of the time in UCD and 80% of the time working with SDSN. My portfolio is the education portfolio, and I guess that's why I'm here today. And I just want to, we have a new annual report coming out in a few weeks. So this code is for the one last year. But to give you a sense of what the SDG Academy looks after, the first thing we do is content. So we are producing free open education resources that we put up on edX. edX is the Harvard MIT platform for online courses. And we have about 50 courses there at the moment. And of course, they're free. So I think even in your training as secondary and primary teachers, you are free to use these resources and to look at the different topics. Now, they are in English. I realize that. They do mix science with UN policy and practice, but the practice piece, even though there is a good bit of content which is applied to Africa, like we have an industrial policy course for Africa, for example, and I know there's components of a lot of the courses that apply some of their cases and their learnings to Africa, but we could be doing more going forward into the future. But that's the content, and we do have a library, so that's interesting for Emmanuel, where we can give you a password and you could actually take the individual MP4. So rather than having to do the whole course, you could maybe pick and choose certain videos, certain 15-minute videos. So there's thousands of little small videos of 15 minutes that were an input into creating these online courses, obviously. But that is there too. We call it the SDG library. And we are working with UNESCO at the moment to create what's called an open education resource repository, where we want to put all these digital videos and resources into folders that can be distributed through all the public libraries of the world, including the UN libraries in every country, but also public libraries and schools. This won't be ready for a year, but when it's ready, it's going to be very useful to bring it to your local library in a school. You can just bring in the folders, and then there's open licenses, so you can repurpose and translate and edit and even create your own kind of local or community version or African version of these resources. But that's in the future. It'll take a year to do this, but we're planning this. So that's on the content creation side. On the training side, I'll show you a second. We do have an online master's. In fact, we have a pathway from edX. We have certs that move into diplomas and then onto a Master's of Science. And we're doing it in University College Dublin first, my university, but we are working with Dar es Salaam actually in Africa, and we're working with a Mexican university, and one from Oman, and one from Sunway in Malaysia, and one in North America. So we hope to have in 6 UN languages, 6 masters, and they will share their LMSs, their courses. People will be able to online take the courses across the universities as electives, even though they get a degree from their local university. We're also starting to work on professional certs. So this is more for people in corporates who are working already, and it could be useful for teachers if you wanted to, say, get one of our professional certs in sustainable development. It's just to show some companies are giving their workers their day off a month, or maybe Friday afternoon, and they would upskill or do these courses so they can say they're upskilling on sustainable development and sustainability. We're also working with a good few companies with their HR, this is their human resource section, where some big companies are now mandating all workers to upskill on sustainable development, and they actually have to do it through their HR portal. So if you want to get paid next month, you have to do your training on sustainability, and we're working with a lot of companies on that as well. We do what we call community work. I'll come back to the UNESCO SDSN OER Joint Committee in a while. Mission 4.7 is an interesting one for the teachers here, because this is a partnership between UNESCO, the Pontifical Academy of Science, Social Science, Columbia University, SDSN, Ban Ki-moon Center, where they want to work on Mission 4.7. Mission 4.7 basically says that you have to have a continuum of education from preschool all the way through K-12, all the way into university. In fact, you also have to re-educate the labor force, so lifelong learning to the end. So this is and it's important that there's a continuum there, right? There's no point educating young people on sustainability if they can't do it in a university, or they can't do it in a job. You know, you have to basically have everyone in companies and everyone in schools, from preschool all the way up to university, having a continuum of sustainable development education. And that is a challenge, but that's what Mission 4.7 is. And finally, we do a bit of thought leadership. So we bring out publications, present at UN meetings. So there's an exciting meeting in September, which is called the SDG Summit. It's the midpoint review. This is at the General Assembly, where all the leaders of the world come, and they're going to review the progress on the SDGs. And it's not good news. Unfortunately, with COVID, with the wars, with a lot of different problems, we are going backwards on achieving the SDGs, and the climate crisis is getting worse. Social inequalities are getting worse, and even economic progress is actually declining. So, and governance is in some places is deteriorating. So if you like, the report, the school report on how the SDG is doing is not good, but hopefully there's what they're going to do is do a midpoint review and then get more commitment and to achieving the SDGs. And what they say, it's like in football, we're losing the game in the first half. The second half, we have to do brilliantly to win the game, and that's the way they're putting it in the UN at the moment. Okay. Just before I go back to some examples of what we're doing on the education portfolio, I just want to do just a little bit, a few reflections on the SDGs. The first thing is the whole concept of sustainable development. I mean, it's not particularly new. I think it goes back a long time. I think most people in the UN give credit to the Norwegian minister, Brundtland, a lady, in her Brundtland Commission, Our Common Future. And then she defined sustainable development of obviously somehow in the way we organize our political and social and economic systems and the way we treat the environment as a source and a sink, you know, we should leave it in as good a condition as we find it, basically for future generations. And people work with this definition, and it's the definition that underpins the SDGs as well. Okay. The way I look at these things, though, is more an ethical point of view. Is I think the way you should think about the SDGs is that when you're actually doing your everyday activities, you know, you should really say, you should really care for people and care for planet, in the sense that, am I knowingly or unknowingly causing damage on other people or on the planet in what I do in my job, what I do in my kind of home or community, what I do in my politics or in the governance and so on. So I think it does come down to something as simple as that, which somehow it's very difficult for humans in the way we've organized our institutions and our mentality to do. But that's really the essence of the SDGs, is to basically care for people and planet in our everyday activities. I mentioned Rio and Rio Plus 20 already. And I guess there is a bit of an evolution of how we got to a point where we're talking about the SDGs. From the UN's perspective, what they had is a separate run on the environment. They had the Commission on the Environment, and they have these meeting of the parties on biodiversity and climate change. And unfortunately, they're separate kind of departments and separate sort of institutions that run those, compared to the socioeconomic section of the UN and the governance section. So in a way, what the SDGs was about was to have this more integrated and comprehensive approach in the UN system, that really we've got to think about how we talk about governance, how we talk about economic and social issues and environmental issues. They have to be integrated, and we have to have a way of doing that, okay? And they're asking people to do that in the national governments and local governments, in the public policy as well. And it seems relatively straightforward until you realize that that's not how we've evolved. We've evolved to be in silos where economic policy is quite separate to social and environmental policy, and that we're not really doing comprehensive planning, or we're not really thinking, like even inside a school, on the estate and the premises and the curriculums and the careers. We're not quite integrating environment, society into economic thinking or even governance thinking. Just to realize the Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that outcome document, the SDGs are part of this outcome document, but they're actually just one section. There is what's called a preamble and a call for action, which to me has a vision and has a narrative on the project and has the ethical kind of foundations. So they're in section 1. Section 2 does have the 17 goals and associated 169 targets. There is also a section 3, which is turning out to be very important. This is about the means of implementation. So how do we get data to achieve the SDGs? How do we, because data is not, like you might get economic data, but how do you get the data on society, the data on the environment, and the data on good governance? And how can you bring them together when you're trying to make decisions at local government or regional or national government? So finance for sustainable development is another big issue at the moment. They call it the SDG stimulus, but clearly like getting finance into the developing world, getting finance that actually gives projects that have social impact and empower the environment, like protect the environment. So finance for sustainable development is another topic. Technology. So these are the means of implementation. Data, partnerships, education, a big one, the greatest enabler of all, finance, data, training, and so on. So you mightn't have, if you go onto the UN websites and you're looking for the SDGs, you might actually see they're talking about, why are they talking about partnerships? Why are they talking about data and finance and technology? But actually, these are the drivers or the enablers. These are the means of implementation, the MOIs as they're called. And that's a very important part of the agenda. And then the last section is to follow up and review a section. Now, in the negotiations, some countries wanted a more legal framework, more accountability, a more there should be some kind of punishments even, or some incentives for countries to actually implement, because this is not a binding agreement at the global level. But the couple of things they did on the follow-up and review was, first, they took a very academic thing. They asked all countries to do a voluntary national review at least every 4 years. And so every country said they would come to the UN in July in the high-level political forum, and they would present. This year we had 39 presentations, including Ireland, about, you know, what have you done in the last 4 years to implement the SDGs at home? And people would talk about their whole of government approaches, what they've done with data, with funding. They give some success stories, youth empowerment, stakeholder empowerment. Now, when things are done at national level, they're done by the legislator, and they're obviously more legal, and they're different to if you do them at other levels. But at the global level, it's what's called voluntary national review, but peer review is a powerful process. You don't want to be standing up as a proud country and saying we've done nothing on sustainable development. So there is a good bit of peer, let's call it pressure, particularly by your neighbors, to actually have done something interesting on implementing the SDGs. But also in the follow-up review, it does tell countries that at a regional level, like the European Union, you have to implement the SDGs. And it says at a national level, you have to come up with your own processes. Now, the UN is never going to tell its members or the national governments what they have to do. But there is, in the document, it does give suggestions about what type of pathways and what sort of instruments and what sort of choices you have to implement the SDGs. And that's why at kind of regional talks, like the African Union or global talks, people try to help each other in creating a framework to implement the SDGs. But the UN has nothing binding. It's all more what we call voluntary reviews, or what's called a peer review process. The goals, there are 17 goals. The way I like to think about them is the first 7 are more like the MDGs plus, they're like social goals. Then there's the economic goals. And then there's the environmental goals, 13, 14, 15, which is land, air, water. And then there's governance goals about good institutions, and then partnerships, global and national partnerships to implement the SDGs. Because the duty bearer for the SDGs is all people everywhere, meaning that, you know, academia and civil society, the private sector and governments have to come together at home to try and implement the SDGs, but then they have to be interoperable with other countries through multilateral processes and through multilateral institutions. So this is how it works. The MOIs, I've just explained to you the means of implementation. As you know, we have to reorientate finance to the SDGs. A lot of finance does not. At the moment, we're putting a lot of our taxpayers' money into militarization and security, unfortunately. I mean, I think there's something up to $15 trillion a year spent on military and weapons and security. And the sad thing is that we only need probably 3 to 6 trillion to have everyone in school, have everyone with free health, everyone enjoying safe drinking water and sanitation. So to achieve the SDGs, is the World Bank and SDSN and IMF have calculated it's in the region of, say, 6 trillion. But at the moment, where the world is spending 15 to 20 trillion on weapons and militarization and securitization. So that's a very sad situation for the world, in a sense that, and when you look at the money that is available for outside of security and militarization, it tends to be for the private sector, and it tends to be a focus on the rich kind of countries or OECD countries. And finance is not really available for environmental projects or social projects, or to get into least developed countries, etc. So there is a big job happening to get money into the SDGs. And last year, there was the Transforming Education Summit, where the call from UNESCO is that every country is to spend at least 3% of its GDP in education, or maybe up to 20% of its fiscal spend on education. Because if you don't have kids educated and people in university and professional training, if you don't have education, you really don't have a society or an economy or a political system or any hope really of achieving the SDGs. So, but unfortunately, a lot of countries are not putting the money into education. And there's also a call for the international community to create an education facility, meaning that some countries just don't have the money to have free education up by primary and secondary and in universities. So there should be funds that transfer across countries. And this is the best way to ensure the world has peace and works towards sustainable development. And it's actually the cheapest way, because education compared to health systems or compared to, you know, infrastructures, etc., is quite cheap. So actually, maybe you'd probably need, they're saying about 600, half a trillion, but maybe, let's say, 1 trillion would easily, and this is just a fraction of 1% of global GDP, could ensure education for everyone and free access for everyone and free books and everything for everyone, right? So there is a big attempt to reorientate finance towards good, towards nature, and towards education and towards SDGs, but it's a struggle. And it's, again, sad for humanity that we have so much money and we don't spend it on the right things. Same with technologies, same with the way we create data, same with the way we do science policy interfaces. The biggest one lately is that, so in the UN, there's a thing called Open Science, and the SDG Academy is working very hard at open science, open data, and open education resources. In fact, the countries of the world in 2019 signed what's called a UNESCO OER recommendation that said education resources should be free for all levels of schooling and lifelong learning, right? But the same goes for any research that is done on taxpayers' money should be freely available to the world. And unfortunately, when we did the vaccine for COVID-19, that was done, the research was done in the universities, but they gave the property right to these private companies. And then obviously the vaccine was not shared with the rest of the world and became extremely expensive for everyone in the Northern Hemisphere. And to be honest with you, that was, I think there's a lot of anger from the developing world towards the developed world for that episode, because that was wrong. I mean, any sort of technology for good should be open science if it's done by the taxpayers of any country, and it should be copied for free and distributed for free and produced for free right across the world. But that's COVID-19 highlighted that problem, but that problem exists every day. It exists in academic work, it exists in seed and fertilizers, it exists everywhere. So there is a big movement for open science that academics, everyone has to learn to put their property rights on, make it open for everyone to use and repurpose, and there should be free science and into production and consumption of science, and the same with data, and the same with open education resources, because if we don't have that, it's going to be very difficult to build the capacities across the world. You end up in very poor situations. The same with education. There should be a lot of work to obviously work together or work in your own school, but there should be capacity building across the schools and across countries and nations, putting resources and putting money and supports into education for children. It's probably the easiest thing we can do, the cheapest thing we can do, but somehow not done. And of course, what this is about, this professional training and this whole ceremony today, the onboarding of all of you, is teachers realizing that they have to upskill, and with the purpose of being the change agent that will work to bring this content into their schools and to convince obviously their board and the education system that this needs to be done. And this is not an easy task. In Europe, where we have a lot of resources for education, education in Europe tends to be very different by every country. It doesn't matter whether it's Ireland or France or Germany or Portugal or wherever. And the whole idea of changing data and curriculum, training the teachers, and getting the continuum right, it's actually a difficult task. But to be honest, it'll be easier if there is a bottom-up movement by teachers to say this needs to be done. And one step is that we have to have the knowledge on the ground, and it should be an easier task to bring this in at any nation level and so on. But we can talk about that later, about how do you get policy to help change the curriculum and train the teachers so that you can get sustainable development education into the schools. Okay, I talked a bit about the follow-up and the review process a second ago. So the key messages about the SDGs is that they are a universal agenda. So every country in the world has to do this. Okay, it's not, so that's interesting, right? And not just every country, we're talking about every community, every nation state, country, every region, and it's a global movement. And it is a transformative agenda, meaning that the status quo has to change. So how we do things inside schools, how we, even in the governance structures, how we do things inside corporates, how we do them inside governments, or even in the UN system, have to change or transform into the institutions, into the bylaws, into the KPIs, into the way we do our planning, the way we do our everyday. So it is a transformative agenda. It's disruptive. It's a very disruptive agenda in that sense, okay? Because the status quo is not where we want to be. It is indivisible, meaning that you can't cherry pick. You can't say, I want to achieve the economic goals, but I don't care about the environmental or societal or governance goals. So you have to achieve everything together. And it does have this nice term, leave no one behind, which is, you know, you have to be careful that in a transformative process that you don't marginalize those who are the most disadvantaged, or the ones who cannot help themselves, or the ones who are like old people or young people who have some dependencies, etc. Now, I just want to, the way everyone tries to make this agenda into a simplified way of thinking. So the economists in University College London have a thing called donut economics. So this is supposed to represent a donut. And it's basically saying we have to have economic systems that are based on a good social foundation, so that all workers and households have, access to health and education and gender equality and energy and food and etc. So in other words, that, the economic systems cannot be exploiting society to make money, but they have to, in a way, have to be built on a good social protection floor. And to be honest, the economy will do better if everyone is educated and everyone is healthy, etc., and not discriminated against. So it's kind of obvious. It's difficult to get there, but that's what they'd like. And the other thing is, for environment, we have to stay within Rockstrom's 15 planetary boundaries, like by not having ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, climate, the climate emissions, etc. But that's where we want to get to, and it'd be very nice to have economic systems that help build social foundations and stay within planetary boundaries. The reality is that where we are at the moment is you take that donut and you crumple it up into all the crumbs. And actually what we have to do is put the donut back together. We've got to say, well, in every economic policy, we've got to look at the social environmental implications, and we have to rebuild them where there's positive linkages across these dimensions of society, environment, economy, and in governance. So in reality, it's very difficult to get to the donut, to realize where we're starting is with the crumbs of the donut. And the same goes for the scientists. The scientists like to talk about the wedding cake. So scientists in general care very much about the health of the ocean, the health of our soil, the health of our air, in terms of carbon emissions or even pollutions and chemicals and things, right? And they argue that if you don't have land, air, if you don't have food, nutritious food and good air and good water, then you don't have a safe operating space for humanity. So that should be prioritized. And when you put that as the foundation, then you can build your wedding cake. You can have your societal issues, your economic issues, and finally your governance issues at the top. I would kind of argue again that it is true that we need to protect our environmental resources, but I would say that maybe starting with governance, in governments, in schools, in universities, in corporates, that we all have to change our missions and our priorities and how we protect the environment and society, right? And in a sense, the foundations for a good sustainable development pathway could be good governance in all entities, not just corporates, but also in governments and in schools and everywhere. So in a sense, having the right ethics, the right sort of mission statements, the right sort of strategic plans and targets and follow up and review and monitoring, maybe that's what we need first. And then we can actually protect society, economy, and we can protect environmental resources as well. So, and even the UN itself has tried to create these 6 transformations and 4 levers to try and, make it easier. They talk about the human well-being transformation, the economic transformation, the energy transformation to get rid of fossil fuel, food systems transformations, the urban system transformations, and then protection of the global environmental commons. And they talk about, yes, changing governance and the economic and finance and partnerships and technologies. But the original document on the SDGs, and this was done by UNDESA, has a set of 169 targets. And even though this is a text analysis, one person, a French guy in UNDESA said, okay, let me just show you, if I was talking about something like, say, inequality or SDG 10, where is in the targets of SDG 10, where does it talk about the other goals or the other targets? And of course, what you see is there's huge linkages, like education could be linked across all the goals. It's not just SDG 4. You could nearly link education to lots of the other goals, right? So education is here, for example. It links into 1.4. So this is on poverty and education systems, etc., and financing of education. So the point is education and intergender empowerment and so on. So and into peaceful systems, inclusive society. So this is what the text said in the SDGs, but obviously academics since then, particular scientists have said, actually there's more linkages than you think across all the different goals. And the only way really to achieve the SDGs is to create these positive linkages across the goals, or what we call spillovers, or positive spillovers. So actually in every activity we do, whether in a household or in our government, or how we interact with government, or how we interact with our workplace, we've got to be thinking about what are the linkages between inclusiveness for society and people, the linkages to nature and to good governance and to economic sustainability or livelihood sustainability. And we do that in each of our actions, and then that adds up to building something like the economic donut, or it looks like a system that is moving on the 4 dimensions. But at the moment, what we see is a lot of negative spillovers, where there's a lot of unintended or intended damage to people and nature, and even to governance because of people's actions. And that has to be completely internalized. And of course, for people to realize, you have to go back to school, and you have to build this into curriculum. You have to build it into the universities, and also build it into the professional upskilling of workers to realize that you do in your everyday activities have these 4 dimensions, and you've got to use the policies or the technologies or behaviors to make these positive linkages and not negative linkages. So this is kind of an argument I was saying with the wedding cake, that I don't think you should minimize governance. I would say that sustainable development is that good societies, good environmental management, and good economic prosperity or sustainability is actually built on good governance. And I mean bureaucracy, bureaucratic, parliamentary, military security, and not just in governments, but also in corporates and in civil society organizations like schools and so on. So these are the structures of power. When we talk about the SDGs, and it's quite complicated, you have to have a common mission and a common focus of governments, business, civil societies, from local to national to global level. You've got to, reform businesses across all sectors, reform finance, reform civil society, even reform the UN system itself. So that's just a little aside on how I feel about the SDG project and what it is, and hopefully just motivates you how important change is at an individual level or at a school level, where you look at governance, you look at environmental issues, societal issues, even in economic sustainability, and you understand that they are interrelated and connected, and that they should be connected in policies and in missions, in curriculums, and in everyday society, and so on. The SDG Academy, I'm just going to give you, I showed you our 4 pillars about content, training, community, and thought leadership. I'm just going to give you some examples, and then we'll go and have a Q&A. So on content, like I said, well, obviously everyone in the class, the teachers here, can go on to edX, onto the SDG Academy website with edX, and you can do any of these 48 courses. The most popular one at the moment is the UN environmental program called Nature-Based Solutions for Disaster and Climate Resilience. But as I said, if we give you the password, you're able to go into the library, and you can take you don't have to do the whole courses. You could do the different, what we call sections or modules, or even individual videos for those sections and modules. Because normally it's 14 weeks of courses. A course would have 14 weeks. And then week 1, you'd have a 20-minute video with some resources and some questions and answers. So it might be interesting to be able to take those elements rather than just doing the whole course on edX. On training, there is something that could be interesting for you guys here. If you wanted to go and to do the Foundations of Sustainable Development, which is Rockstrom's course on planetary boundaries. You do Jeffrey Sachs's course on the Age of Sustainable Development, and then an SDSN course on the metrics of sustainable development, just like, let's call it the governance or metrics. With those 3 courses, and it's about $120, you can get a certificate from UCD and SDSN, which allows you to go on a pathway. So what you can do is use the certificate, even if you haven't a good undergraduate, even if you think you haven't the right kind of background, but you're a teacher, so you have some professional training, you can use this certificate to get into the diploma in UCD, which adds, it takes that 10 credits, adds another 10 credits on what we call the global classroom. And if you get a good grade on that, you can actually go into the Masters in Sustainable Development, and you can get a Master's in Science. And about 20% of people on that course are teachers at the moment, taking it quite seriously that they've to upskill on sustainable development. This pathway we hope to replicate in Dar es Salaam and across other universities, like I explained before, but this is the one that exists at the moment. The community, this is the work that we've been doing on the OER recommendation, the Open Education Resource Recommendation. That's a legal instrument in UNESCO. And we've actually built a nice SDSN UNESCO committee out of this, and we're presenting at the SDG Summit in a few weeks. And we're going to announce what we call an OER overlay journal or repository. And the idea is that we want to get all our education resources into the best practice with library resources, so that people all over the world, because they'll be open license, can actually take them, translate them, repurpose them, and use them in schools, for example, much easier. In fact, you can just bring them into the public libraries or the school libraries. It's going to take a few years, but this is the project that came out of the Transforming Education Summit as a solution. So what we said was, wouldn't it be nice if we could distribute all our content or create content in digital folders that we could send all over the world? And the answer is, we do have a digital highway that's publicly owned. It's called libraries, and they are the public library infrastructure. They have very nice technology that they can archive, they can put on nice taxonomies, nice open licenses, make them easily accessible and repurposed and used. And this is what we're going to try and do with the Academy's open education resources, but we're going to allow everyone who wants to put resources on them. We'll referee them, put them into nice templates, put the right handles, and distribute them to everywhere in the world, because it is a big job to put sustainable development into curriculum in schools and universities, and even in professional training and HR. It's the knowledge and content is really not there, particularly in different languages and in different applications. So that's one community. Another community is we're Secretariat to Vision 4.7, which I've talked about before. And finally, we are starting to produce some publications and books and working. So this is an example of the European Commission. We're working on what's called Build Skills project. So in Europe, they see construction as one of the dirtiest industries or hardest industries to transform to net zero. In other words, to reduce climate emissions and other damage to nature, etc. So this project takes people involved in vocational training, and it works with the European Commission to bring in sustainability issues into the different dimensions of the building sector or construction sector. So this could be planning, this could be raw materials like cement, etc. And the idea is to redo the professional training, or what we call the professional certification and vocational training in the construction sector in Europe, to make sure that it trains people to be more environmentally aware and sustainable. And this is kind of a thought leadership project, but it's not easy, because you've got to think about skill components for the digital transformation. You've got to think about sustainability. You've got to think about all different dimensions of the industry. So again, professional accreditation has evolved to be very different in the construction sector. Now we have to dismantle it and put in different competencies, different skills, different sustainability issues, and to retrain everyone and to regulate it so that it becomes a less, let's say, a more environmentally friendly sector. And construction is a very important sector in Europe and every other country. So I finished my presentation, and I'm very happy to take lots of questions. There are some of our social media handles, and I'll stop now. So I let Emmanuel take the questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof, for this insightful session and engaging one indeed. We sincerely appreciate each and every part of it. For those of us that have a question, I would like to start from the YouTube participant. Those of us on YouTube, please kindly use the comment section to drop your question, as Prof is still on the call to attend to those questions. And those of us that are on Zoom, please drop your question. You can raise your hand, and also the comment section will be enabled for you to drop your questions. So we have different people. Okay, I'm going to start from Miva, Madagascar. You can please unmute your mic. But Prof, may I confirm, you prefer to take like 2 questions at once or 3 questions at once?
Yeah, we can do, let's do 2 at once to start with.
Right.
We see, we might move to 3 if we're. So.
All right, all right.
Neva.
Okay, I think she's off the call. Okay, let's.
No, she's there. Go ahead, speak.
Yes, thank you, Professor. I'm Neva from Madagascar. I am working in a private school. I am a coordinator of school inclusion. My question is that you say that every country has to spend specific money on education. So is there a way to follow up, or how to make this situation really effective for the government? Thank you.
Yeah, so in some ways, I think Maeva, so I think this is difficult for all of us. So in a way, why I like the Sustainable Development Solution Network is that, or Jeffrey Sachs in particular, is that in a way we should stay in our university. Do you understand? Like, so I work in a university, like my day job should be, I teach my courses, I, do my administration, I do my research, and, and that's what I should do, right? The problem is that even in the university sector, and this is the same as schools, is that the reality is that there's a lot of policies that are being created by government and other stakeholders that are changing your everyday life. And you can't really quite understand it maybe, or, quite think that you can influence it. But what SDSN is asking people to do, like academia particularly, is to come out of its ivory tower and to say, listen, we've a lot of commercial and government and other sort of influences in the universities that are not good. And what we want to do is to say, you should change your policies. And in a way, what SDSN has done is that we're walking into bureaucratic side of government, into the parliaments, into even the lobbyist groups or the corporates involved in these things. And we're saying, listen, honestly, research and education has to be funded better, has to be reorientated to the kids, to the teachers, and that it cannot, benefit all of these other types of, let's call them stakeholders in the sectors, because it's just not good, And this is not just in education, this is in health, it's in capital and infrastructure, it's everywhere, right? So all I can kind of say to you really is, and I don't know what your country is, but like, what are the teachers doing in Ireland, for example? Okay, so what they've realized is that they can set up a like teachers advocacy. They can go to their boards and say, look, we have a movement here. The parents, you have a parent teacher association and the boards of the schools, and say, look, we're part of a network of teachers, and honestly, we need to do better in terms of what's happening here, right, at a school level. But also then to work with unions, if you have unions, to start saying to the governments and to the bureaucrats, etc., that, this is what has to happen on the ground, and this is the sort of money that UNESCO are recommending to put into education. And I know it's suddenly making you a kind of an advocate it's making you do things that you shouldn't be doing because you should be focusing on teaching. But I do think in a climate emergency or in the way the world is it does take people, I'm not saying to be demonstrating, you know, like good trouble as they called it in America. I'm not saying you should be demonstrating or calling the government to account in newspapers or anything like this. I'm talking about setting up structures like through unions or through teacher advocacy, going to the departments of the education, going to the ministers and saying, look, this is what needs to happen. Here are the documents. Here are, and it's just a bit of advocacy. But I think if this sort of movement happens across the schools, I think the boards in the schools respond, the Department of Education responds, you know, the government will respond. It takes a bit of coordination, and it takes this asserting yourself as an agent of change, and you start to write letters and to request that this happens, right? And it might not be natural to a lot of individual teachers or individuals, but unfortunately, that's what has to happen.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that wonderful response, Prof. Can we have Chioma from Nigeria? Kindly unmute your mic and ask your question, Chioma. And those of us on YouTube, please use the comment section to drop your question, and the program managers are going to read it from there. Over to you, Chioma.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Prof, for this wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
Though my question has kind of been addressed, I wanted to ask, as teachers, especially teachers in the private schools, you know, how do we ensure that this is being applied, that these policies are being applied in our countries, in our regions? And you've kind of slightly answered it. But from the training, is there any way we can be empowered to be able to go to the ministries of education in our regions, or, you know, through our unions, to kind of lend a voice to some abnormalities that we know happen and is happening? And also being from some of African countries, like my country, sometimes, you know, government has the final say. They kind of do what they feel like. So how do we, you know, what is this training going to kind of equip us to be able to get those issues addressed if we can pull our voices together? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just to complete my answer to Maeva and to answer you as well. So I think we shouldn't, I'm looking outwards and upwards, you know, to influence change, but, you know, we shouldn't underestimate the role we play in the classroom. So obviously, when you learn this knowledge and you depart it to children and students, or I depart it to people in the university, students, I mean, they also are the future and the agents of change. So you cannot underestimate how important that is. So the training you get here is to learn the knowledge and to depart the knowledge to the younger generation. And of course, that's what your vocation is, right? But on top of that, just like you've articulated, you know, you can, through the public sphere, definitely through the unions and departments of education and into the, you know, into the ministries, you know, articulate that this needs to happen and why. And that's what you're learning in this course. And also there is a UNESCO framework that they're very aware of, because they're the ministers who go to the UNESCO meetings every year. On the private school thing, because I'm Irish, we don't have a lot of private schools. Like, so all our schools are public. So we have free education, preschool, free education. Now, not necessarily books, but we have free education for primary, secondary, and even the undergraduate. Now, there's always costs. I mean, you have to be able to live and have clothes and have books, etc. So it's never completely free. And it is run by the state. The private school issue, it's very clear to me that I saw what's called a GEMS, or a monitoring report on education from UNESCO, which took up this issue of private and public education, particularly across Africa. And I suddenly did realize that there is a lot of private education, you know, households paying money, but also it's private schools that are stepping in because the governments aren't building enough schools, I guess, or supplying the the resources, training the teachers or the wages for the teachers, etc. So there is that deficit, and the private sector is stepping in. But I guess the way I would treat the private sector is that this is good business to have a curriculum and to have an orientation towards the SDGs, because the students like it, it builds them for the future, and it could actually justify why some parents would pick your private school and not the other private schools, because it realizes you're aligning to the skills of the future and sustainability issues around climate, because nobody is ignoring climate at the moment. I'm sure the average temperatures in every country across the world is much higher than it should be, and it's becoming very destructive, right? So I don't think, but again, it's not good that the teacher and the unions and a bottom-up movement has to say to a board of management, honestly, you should have a curriculum that's orientated to the care of people and care of planet, because it should always been it that way. I know maybe social Catholic teaching was like that if you're a Catholic, aligned to some Catholic ethos, and I'm sure to all the other religions, they are aligned to that ethos. So maybe it's just to point that out. It's to point out that the ethos of the school, it's good business to really have a focus on sustainable development, and it's obviously good public policy, and it's good for the children as well. So again, it's for the teachers. Like, hopefully this course gives you the knowledge that you can actually do this advocacy, right? I know it's very difficult to change systems. I know that. It's very difficult to change it inside universities, inside governments, very difficult, even inside schools. But in a sense, when you have this knowledge and know-how, you'd be surprised that people might support you. They might just say, you're right. So, and this is what we have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Prof. I just want to read one or two questions from YouTube participants. Yeah. There's a question from Best. She asks that, my question is, how do we simplify these teachings for our school children to understand? How do we make it more simplified for the students to understand? Then there's another question from Emmanuel. He asks that, how involved is the United Nations in terms of their engagement at ensuring a smooth training and upgrade of people in the SDGs across the globe? Well, I would say that if you read the reports, the recent report that was launched, you get to know more about that. And there is another question which I want to ask. Okay, let me just check for that question. Okay, from Christian Kennedy, said, please, Prof, can you restate the entry points for transformation? The entry points for transformation. So those are the three questions we're extracting from.
Yeah, so hopefully I got the first question right on the curriculum. So this is a very good point. I think that this is the point you're making, right? So we are providing you with, like, the SDG Academy courses that we're providing, which you can be used. Some would look at it and say, that's kind of advanced undergrad or maybe master's level. And even though it brings in science and policy and practice, and there are nice videos, they're like Netflix movies, you cannot use them for young children. So we have a problem. And that's exactly right. I think one of the challenges, this is why we want to create this repository of resources, that when people translate these into their own languages or translate them into stories or ways of teaching to younger children, because this is an art form. It's developing curriculum for each grade and every level of schooling has happened over many, many years. And then suddenly we want to bring in issues to do with nature and people, at a level that is easy for the student. And this is again, a body of work that has to be done. And my only way through this is to say, our best strategy for this is to create resources with open licenses so people can't commercialize them, or if they do, they have to give you money, and to share them. And to actually, potentially it'd be great if you could work with the governments, with committees. So in Ireland at the moment, We've set up committees for each year, bringing in new subjects, mainstreaming sustainability into, geography, politics, maths, physics, and so on, economics. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to create this new curriculum for the different levels of schooling. And it's not there. And we all have to help each other create it, right? And it gets worse because this curriculum has to be transformed for what's called the digital transformation as well. And the 21st century skills like teamwork, and then SDG type skills like empathy. So curriculum reform is about skills and competencies as much as it is about knowledge of nature and food systems or climate change and so on. So there are big deficits in the curriculum. And again, teachers with knowledge can help, but they have to work with their departments of education and really work with others across the world to very rapidly change this curriculum, because it's a big job at the moment to do it, right? The second question's in the same vein. The UN is a membership organization, right? In other words, it's the countries pay a fee, if you like, to be part of the global system, where they have dialogues through their different councils, like the General Assembly's leaders, Economic and Social Councils at ministerial level, human rights commissions, and so on. And the problem there is that the UN, when it does professional training through UNITAR or whatever, that's to train the UN system. It's to train people who are in UN operations, UN ops, or in UNDP or UNEP, like development program or the environmental program. And their professional training is just to upskill their own staff, whether it's within country or across country, right? So unfortunately, the professional training for people to upskill, for teachers in particular to upskill, or for people even in corporates who want to be sustainability officers or to bring sustainability or what we call ESG into corporates. That's ESG is the corporate thing for environment, society, governance. That even the GEMS report, when this is UNESCO report on training, even in a country like Ireland that does free education, it's the private sector that does the training of the labor force. And I kind of remind the Irish government that back in the 80s, when there was a lot of structural change because of trade liberalization, a lot of the exporting companies were taking off and import competing companies were dying. So you had a lot of older people unemployed. The younger people with tech skills were getting employed. You had a lot of transformation, a lot of disruption to the labor force. And the government and the European Commission had to step in and fund a lot of the training and upskilling. And at the moment, they're not doing that. So this is a problem going forward. The UN does not do this. This is going to be up to national governments and regions to actually upskill the labor force and upskill the teachers and to create the resources for that. But in a way, if you think about it, the sort of social disruption that you will have in energy transformations and so on, moving from fossil fuel to renewables, the different folks, there'll be winners and losers everywhere, and you've got to re-educate and retrain the losers, or else you'll have a social or a political problem. Sure. So that's just to answer that question. So the responsibility lies with the sectors and the national governments, unfortunately, right? But I mean, SDSN, the work we're doing in the academy is trying to tell corporates and NGOs and governments that you do have to upskill your staff. You should really have free resources to do this. And we try to give them that and we try to create them. But they do need to give people a day off or allow people to do masters or to help people upskill as much as possible. But you'd be surprised your school, if they wanted a sustainability officer or somebody who's good at the SDGs, might actually fund you to do a master's on this or to do upskilling. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, people are definitely interested, but the responsibility lies within country. Somebody asked me about the entry points that the UN are focusing on, right? So just to explain where this came from, there are 17 goals and 169 targets. And this came from what's called an open working group that was chaired by Kamau of Kenya and an ambassador from Hungary, who's actually an outgoing president of the General Assembly. And they sat countries in groups of 3 and asked them what are their priorities, you know, like small island development states and so on. And they came up with the 17 goals and 169 targets. And it's a lot, but it was the shopping list of these countries. And then they said, okay, we're going to go with these 17 goals and 169 targets. I guess the UN, the scientists came along and they were asked to write a thing called the Global Sustainable Development Report. So I was involved in the first 2 prototypes of that with UNDESA in 2015, 2016. But since then, there has been 2 reports by 12 independent scientists. One that came out in 2019, and now there's the Global Sustainable Development Report that's coming out in 2023, and there's actually a draft version of that you can get on the UN website. They like to, in their advice to governments, they're telling them to focus on 6 transformations and 4 levers. And the 6 transformations, if I can remember them, are first, the well-being. So well-being is just looking at individuals, their access to education, their access to health, to good nutrition, to clean water, sanitation, to not to be discriminated against, and so on. So that's first transformation of human well-being. There's a transformation of the economic system, which I described, is that every economic policy or every economic agent should be made not have negative externalities to other people and nature. So those externalities have to be internalized. You cannot make business on the basis of damaging people and damaging nature. That has to stop. So that's the transformation in the economic system. There's the energy transformation, number 3, which you're probably very aware of. So this is the move to renewable energies. And it's turning out that we probably need super grids for these things in Africa and across the world. But there is hope that we can have an energy transmission and a move away from all fossil fuels. There's a food system transformation, because at the moment we produce enough food to give calories, 1,800 calories, nutritious food. We could feed the world 6 times over, but somehow we process it, we package it, we distribute it, and we destroy it, and then suddenly put sugar in it. And before you know it, the whole world is malnourished. You have obesity in some people, you have undernourishment, overnourishment in some people, undernourishment in others. And then we say the whole food system is based on nitrogen and potassium, which is running out. So we have to start thinking about how to redo our global food system. So that's number 4. Number 5 is the urban transformation. A lot of people are starting to live in cities, and cities in their planning have not been smart in the terms of green spaces and trees, and in terms of, managing society, giving equal access to schools, and, not having ghettos, for example. So there's a big job to be done in the transformation of cities towards sustainable development. And there's a lot of work being done on that. And the final one is the care of nature. Unfortunately, whether this is good or bad, a lot of people are working now with the 30-30 principle, which was agreed in China and Montreal this year, which is 30% of the ocean, 30% of marine protection areas, 30% of land, should be given back to nature. That humans should not be there. You should set aside land, okay? And this is a way forward. In fact, a very famous biodiversity or scientist from Harvard who died quite recently, called Edward Wilson, he said the way forward is half Earth. Half Earth meant that 50% of the ocean and 50% of the land should go to nature. And then he said it'll be easy for humans to feed 9 billion people with the other half. In other words, we'd have clean air and water and good kind of fisheries and ecosystems. And we could probably feed 9 billion easy. But obviously our national governments, it's not that easy to redefine borders, even though national borders are redefined all the time when you actually look at the history of these things. So they're the 6 entry points. that they've asked governments to focus on, to have a policy on, to have a pathway, to have targets, to fund, and to ensure that they happen. And the levers they talk about is technology, to invest in SDG technology and SDG finance, in SDG partnerships, like public-private partnerships. And I'm forgetting one, but there was 4 levers to achieve those 6 transformations. And the new report actually identifies a 5th lever, which is a good one, which is to talk about, you know, we can't create a safe operating space in the world if the Northern Hemisphere somehow tries to make it a transition to sustainable development without helping the Southern Hemisphere, right? Because, you know, there's no point us doing this if the rest of the world is not doing it. So there is an onus to invest in education and invest in the capacity of lower income and middle income countries to do this, because we share one ocean, we share one hemisphere, obviously, with our climate, and we actually share one food system, whether we know it or not. And we kind of have to learn to work in multilateralism to actually protect this if we are actually to move forward. And that means that capacities have to be equalized very quickly. And what that means in education is that there's no point being the top 200 universities or 500 universities in the world, particularly if you're ranked on sustainability, like there's a thing called at times higher education impact rankings. What matters is, the only thing that matters is what universities are doing to actually build capacity in SIDS and LDCs, meaning small island development states and least developed countries, because at the end of this will only work. The oceans, the climate systems, the food systems, these can only be protected and can only work if we have a multilateral approach. And I think there's a growing recognition of this. And that's why I know in Ireland, we had 800 years of colonization, and people in Africa have had about 200 years of colonization. So we understand, Irish people understand colonization, but the reality is that yes, you have to be, you know, your own agent, determine your own future, to drive your own future. But unfortunately, as we say in the Irish language, we all live in the shadow of each other, meaning that we all have to work together and help each other. So being independent is not the solution. Obviously, being independent and making the right choices for Africa is good, but there has to be a world where there's coordination across the different continents, unfortunately, if you're to protect oceans and food systems and climate. So I think I digressed there. Oh, that's the capacity idea, where there has to be capacity across countries and coordination across countries. So I'll take another set of questions.
Yeah, probably might not be able to take any other questions today again. And definitely it's been an engaging session, an impactful one indeed. We sincerely want to appreciate you. Thank you for the time you've spent with us. Let's show Prof some love. Let's show him some emojis in the comment section. Let's show him, let's tell him that really appreciate this wonderful impact he has made this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Paul. And we always hope to have you around, and thank you for your support each and every time we call on you, and you tend to create time out of a very busy schedule.
No problem.
With the Africa.
Okay, so look after yourselves and others and the planet, and I'll see you the next time. All right.
See you the next time.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, dear educators. We believe it's been a great value for your time this evening. And right about now, we are closing to this session. Yeah, like I mentioned, we are going to be having 8 modules. The very first one, I believe it's a very good foundation for you to know what is ahead of the remaining part of the this program. And tomorrow, same time, 4:30 p.m., we are going to be having the second module. That's the second workshop series on education for sustainable development. Don't miss it. It's going to be more impactful, and you're definitely going to enjoy every part of the session. Please, before you leave, ensure you fill the tracking and evaluation form. Those of us on YouTube, please ensure you fill the tracking and evaluation form. We expect you to tell us your feedback, how impactful this session was, and what are the things you are still looking forward to learn during the course of the program, and most especially, it's also going to track your presence if after you attend to this workshop series. And that form is going to close 30 minutes after this meeting has been ended. So please ensure you fill it, and we get to engage each other in the other course of the day. And at this point, on behalf of the leadership of AIIDEV Africa, we really want to appreciate each and everyone joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Yeah, it's going to be reshared. Please, Anita, kindly reshare the form again so that they can all fill. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
We are facing an existential crisis.
Unlike anything the world has ever seen.
We need to take action.
Everyone has to stand up.
The warning is not a new one.
Our world faces a triple planetary crisis of climate change, natural loss, and pollution.
For generations, humanity, often without realizing it, has been destroying the natural world. In the name of progress, we have polluted the Earth's oceans, chopped down its forests, and clouded its skies. Today, nature and our own survival rest on a knife's edge.
It's time to ratchet up the action that we need to have at the country level.
The United Nations Environment Programme was established with one goal in mind: to unite the world in saving our planet.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world
What is this pollution that we have heard so much about?
The Mediterranean is sick. It's being poisoned slowly but steadily for those who need it most.
The 1970s found a world grappling with an unprecedented crisis of pollution. Could the seemingly irreparable damage be undone? UNEP inspired the world to take action, preventing oil spills and toxic discharge by ships, uniting 143 coastal states to limit ocean pollution and save marine life, reducing air pollution and ending the scourge of acid rain. But soon, the world would face its biggest environmental challenge yet.
The destruction of the ozone layer on a global scale is no longer just a theory. The hole over the Antarctica is no longer an isolated seasonal phenomenon.
If the breach continued to grow, the planet would suffer lethal levels of ultraviolet radiation, harming human health, biodiversity, and climate. In 1987, UNEP facilitated the Montreal Protocol. Over 30 countries agreed to phase out the production of almost 100 ozone-depleting substances. The protocol remains one of the greatest achievements of multilateralism.
All nations gathered here can be proud of what we have achieved.
This success set the tone for a series of powerful accords, limiting the movement of toxic waste across borders, protecting the Earth from dangerous, long-lasting chemicals, and restricting the international trade in mercury. Most recently, in 2021, UNEP finished a 2-decade-long campaign to rid the world of highly toxic leaded petrol, saving an estimated 1 million lives each year. As the world grappled with pollution and of international treaties, limiting and in some cases banning the trade of endangered species, safeguarding migratory animals, expanding protected areas, and increasing financing for biodiversity protection. The seminal Earth Summit in Brazil introduced the idea of sustainable development.
This is an historical moment for the mobilization of all peoples of the world.
Over the last 5 decades, UNEP has helped more than 100 countries enshrine the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions and produced scientific studies to guide member states in their decision-making. In 2012, a new international body was established to provide scientific data on biodiversity in a joint effort from UNEP and other UN organizations. In 2019, it found that 1 million species face the threat of extinction, underscoring the urgency to act.
Every action we take alters the earth that future generations will inherit.
The world is starting to recognize the effects of planetary warming, but UNEP began sounding the alarm 3 decades ago. As early as 1988, UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization launched the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. For over 30 years, IPCC science has helped member states counter climate change, earning the body a Nobel Prize for its work. UNEP-backed studies have informed some of the planet's most crucial climate accords. These include a 1992 agreement that set a template for curbing greenhouse gas emissions, followed by the Kyoto Protocol and the landmark 2015 Paris Agreement.
I'm proud to announce that 175 parties have signed the Paris Agreement.
UNEP has also mobilized 450 banks, insurers and investors to help create a more sustainable world.
We don't want fossil fuels anymore.
A lot has happened in the last 50 years, but it's the next 10 that will be pivotal for life on this planet.
But in fact, what you and I and other ordinary people around the world can do will not by itself save the natural world. The great decisions, the